Let's rip the Band-Aid off right now. When you picture the end of the world, you are probably picturing the Flash. You are imagining the mushroom cloud, the shock wave, maybe the Geiger counter clicking like an angry hornet in a radiation zone. Hollywood has spent 70 years training you to worry about the blast radius. But here is the uncomfortable truth that climate modelers have known since the 1980s. In a full-scale nuclear exchange, the blast is actually the merciful part. If you are vaporized in the first millisecond, you miss the main event. The real apocalypse does not happen in a second. It happens over 10 years. It is quiet, it is dark, and it is incredibly cold. Today, we are not talking about warheads. We are talking about what comes after the firestorms stop burning. We are walking through the realistic, evidence-based timeline of nuclear winter, from the first blackout to the decade-long famine that reshapes the human genome. This isn't science fiction. This is the peer-reviewed forecast of how civilization actually unravels when the sky turns black. Before we start the clock on day 0, we need to clear up what nuclear winter actually means because the term gets thrown around loosely. It is not just a really bad storm, it is a stratospheric alteration. When a nuclear weapon hits a city or an industrial center, it does not just knock buildings down. It ignites everything. Plastics, fuel depots, asphalt, wood. These massive firestorms send millions of tons of black carbon soot, smoke essentially shooting straight upward. Unlike a normal forest fire, this smoke is hot enough to loft itself right out of the lower atmosphere and into the stratosphere. Once it is up there above the clouds, there is no rain to wash it out. It just sits there, spreading out like a black blanket around the globe, blocking sunlight for years. That is the mechanism. It turns the Earth into a dark, freezing rock. Before we dive into the timeline, if you appreciate realistic disaster analysis without the hype, secure your spot in this community by hitting subscribe. Now, let's look at the first 24 hours. The first week is defined by direct destruction. In a full exchange between major powers like the US and Russia, we are talking about hundreds, possibly thousands of detonations within a span of hours. The immediate death toll is staggering. Hundreds of millions dead from the blast, heat, and acute radiation. Major logistics hubs, ports, and political centers are gone. But for the survivors in the rural areas or non-combatant nations, the first sign that something is fundamentally wrong with the planet itself won't be the radiation. It will be the sky. While the fires are raging in the target zones, electromagnetic pulses have likely fried power grids over continent-sized areas. So you have no internet, no news, and no electricity. Just a horizon that is glowing red day and night, from fires burning thousands of miles away. At this point, the climate hasn't shifted yet. It is just hot and chaotic. Emergency services are non-existent because the hospitals were targeted or the ambulances simply won't start. This is the kinetic phase where civilization is decapitated but hasn't starved yet. By the second and third week, the fires begin to burn themselves out, but the smoke doesn't dissipate. It rises. Satellites, if any were still functioning, would see black blotches spreading across the northern hemisphere like ink in water. On the ground, survivors notice the sun getting weaker. It starts looking like a dim red disk at noon. Shadows disappear. The temperature, which might have been elevated due to the local fires, starts to plummet. This is the transition from war to winter. Aviation has ceased entirely. So, global shipping and trade freeze. If you live in a city that wasn't hit, the supermarket shelves were emptied on day 3. Now, by day 20, the riots over food distribution are turning into organized armed conflict. But the scariest thing is the silence. With the grid down and the sky darkening, the psychological weight of the event sets in. You realize this isn't a temporary emergency. The sun is actually fading away. Let's move to the 1 to 6 month mark. This is when the climate models show the hammer dropping. As that black carbon soot stabilizes in the stratosphere, it blocks out a significant percentage of solar radiation. We aren't talking about a cloudy day. We are talking about global average temperatures dropping by 1 to 8 degrees Celsius, depending on the scale of the war. To give you context, the last ice age was only about 5 or 6 degrees colder than today. In a severe scenario, we drop into ice age conditions in a matter of months. Inland areas away from the oceans get hit the hardest. In the American Midwest, Ukraine, or central China, temperatures could fall by 20 or 30 degrees below normal. If this happens in summer, you get hard freezes in July. If it happens in winter, you get temperatures so low that infrastructure shatters and livestock freeze to death in the fields. The concept of seasons effectively vanishes. It is just a long gray twilight. The immediate consequence of this cooling is the total destruction of the current growing season. Crops are incredibly fragile. A single night of frost at the wrong time destroys corn or wheat. Now, imagine endless freezing nights. In the first 6 months, every major bread basket in the northern hemisphere fails simultaneously. The US, Russia, Europe, and China, the countries that grow the bulk of the world's calories, produce nothing. Zero. But it is not just the cold. It is the lack of light. Plants need photosynthesis, with sunlight reduced by 40, 50, or even 70% in some models. Crops simply stop growing, they wither. Rainfall patterns also shift violently. The monsoons in Asia, which feed billions, might shut down entirely because the land isn't heating up enough to draw the moisture in from the ocean. So you have a combination of dark, cold, and drought. The global food supply pipeline, which operates on a just-in-time basis, runs dry. This is where we see the transition from panic to mass starvation. Here is the reality check for everyone who stocked up on 3 months of beans. A nuclear winter event does not last 3 months. By year 1, we enter the most dangerous phase for human survival, the Great Famine. The food reserves are gone. The scavenging is done. Now the world has to eat what it can grow, and the planet is refusing to cooperate. Climate models suggest that this cooling persists for years. We're looking at a year without a summer, repeating 3, 4, 5 times in a row. Global caloric production crashes by 50 to 90%. Think about that math. If we produce 90% less food, that means the planet can support 90% fewer people. In a full-scale exchange scenario, studies estimate that over 5 billion people would starve to death within 2 years. This isn't from the bombs. This is purely from the inability to grow a stalk of wheat in Kansas or a bowl of rice in Vietnam. During years 1 through 3, civilization as a political entity breaks down. Governments cannot feed their armies, let alone their citizens. We see state failure on a global scale. What is left of the central governments will likely become incredibly authoritarian, hoarding whatever resources remain for the elite or the military remnants. Martial law is permanent. But outside those fortified zones, it is the Wild West. You will see mass migrations, millions of people moving south toward the equator, hoping for warmth and sunlight. This triggers secondary conflicts. If you are a country near the equator that can still grow a little bit of food, and 100 million starving refugees show up at your border, that is a war. And it is a war fought with desperation. The social contract is void. People are not working for paychecks. Money is worthless, hyperinflationary paper. They are working for calories. The economy reverts to feudalism or direct barter almost overnight. We also have to talk about the sanitation crisis. Famine never comes alone. It brings its friend, plague. With billions dead or dying, and no heavy machinery to bury them and no sewage treatment plants running, water sources become contaminated immediately. In this cold, dark, huddled environment, immune systems are crashing due to malnutrition. Simple diseases like cholera, typhus, and dysentery, which we thought we conquered, come roaring back. Even the common flu becomes a mass killer. The medical supply chain is gone. There are no antibiotics being manufactured. If you get an infection from a scratch while scavenging, you die. This creates a feedback loop. Sick people cannot farm or work, which leads to less food security, which leads to more sickness. By the end of year 3, the global population has likely been reduced to a fraction of its pre-war level. The survivors are those who are lucky, geographically isolated, or brutally pragmatic. Now, let's look at the medium term, years 4 through 10. The climate models show that the soot eventually starts to fall out of the stratosphere. It is a slow process. Gravity takes time to pull those tiny particles down, but gradually the sun gets a little brighter. The deep freeze begins to lift. Temperatures slowly creep back toward a new normal. But do not mistake recovery for normalcy. The ozone layer has likely been shredded. The chemical reactions from the nuclear fireballs and the smoke destroy stratospheric ozone, meaning that as the smoke clears and the sun comes back, it is bringing massive amounts of UVB radiation with it. This is the cruel irony. First, you freeze in the dark. Then, when the sun comes back, it burns you. Survivors emerging from the bunkers or the long winter will face blindness, severe sunburns, and skin cancer rates that go through the roof. Crops that survived the cold might now be fried by ultraviolet radiation. Economically, this period, years 4 to 10, is about stabilization at a primitive level. The global supply chains are not coming back. There is no more gasoline. It is all degraded. Electronics that weren't shielded are useless bricks. We are back to the 1800s, but with better scrap metal. Communities are localized. You live and die within walking distance of your village. The primary industry is scavenging, mining the ruins of the old cities for copper, steel, and tools. Knowledge becomes the most valuable currency. The person who knows how to fix a steam engine or set a broken bone is worth their weight in gold. We might see the rise of city-states or regional confederations, but the concept of a United States or Russian Federation is likely just a memory or a myth. The survivors are growing potatoes, turnips, cold hardy grains. They are raising goats or rabbits. It is subsistence living. The luxury of the modern world, hot showers, internet coffee, is the stuff of legends told to children who will never taste them. Let's zoom out to 20, 30, 50 years post-war. The climate has likely stabilized, possibly even rebounding into a global warming phase as the carbon dioxide from all those fires and the pre-war industrial emissions catches up. But the ecosystem is fundamentally altered. We are talking about a mass extinction event. Many species of large mammals, birds, and specialized plants couldn't survive the decade of cold and darkness. The forests are different. The oceans are different. The fisheries, which collapsed during the winter due to the death of phytoplankton, might take centuries to recover. The world is quieter, emptier. For the human population, we have gone through a genetic bottleneck. We are down to maybe a few 100 million people, perhaps fewer depending on the severity. The genetic diversity is reduced. The cultural trauma is embedded in every religion and social structure. The winter becomes the defining myth of the new civilization. much like the flood is in ours. The biggest risk in the decades following the war isn't starvation anymore. It's the loss of complexity. If the experts died, the engineers, the doctors, the physicists, and the universities were burned, how do we train the next generation? We could easily slide into a new dark age where we are surrounded by technology we cannot replicate. A solar panel lasts 20 years. Once it breaks, can the village blacksmith build a new one? Probably not. So, there is a slow degradation of tech. We might have electricity for a generation and then lose it for 3 centuries. The survivors have to make a choice. Do they try to rebuild the industrial colossus that destroyed the world? Or do they build something smaller, simpler, and sustainable? History suggests we will try to rebuild the colossus, but we might not have the easy fossil fuels to do it this time, since we burned all the easy-to-reach oil in the 20th century. It is important to make a distinction here because not all nuclear wars result in the same winter. Scientists model different scenarios. Let's look at a regional war. Say India and Pakistan drop about 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons on each other's cities. This is only less than 1% of the global arsenal. You might think the rest of the world would be fine. You'd be wrong. Even this small war puts about 5 teragrams of soot into the stratosphere. That is enough to cool the planet by about 1.5 to 2 degrees C for a few years. It sounds small, but that triggers a global food crisis. Crop yields in the US and China drop by 10 to 20%. Food prices triple. Poor nations starve. We essentially get a Great Depression combined with a global famine. Civilization doesn't collapse, but it gets rocked to its core. Millions die outside the war zone, and that is the best-case scenario involving nuclear weapons. Now, compare that to the full exchange. The US and Russia empty the silos. We are talking 150 teragrams of soot. This is the scenario we have been describing. Temperatures drop 8 to 10 degrees on land. Photosynthesis crashes. This is the civilization ender. The difference between a regional war and a global war is the difference between a recession with famine and the end of history. In the regional scenario, the global north might send aid. In the global scenario, there is no one left to send aid. The international community ceases to exist. It is every nation, every town for itself. The models are debated. Some say the soot won't loft as high. Some say it will be worse. But the consensus is that once you pass a certain threshold of smoke, the climate system hits a tipping point that we cannot reverse. It is a one-way ticket to the Stone Age. So, is there any way to actually prep for this? If we are talking about saving civilization, the answer is yes. But it requires government-level action. We need massive stockpiles of food, years' worth, not weeks. We need seed banks that aren't just in a vault in Norway, but distributed in every major city. Specifically stocking cold-tolerant seeds like winter wheat, potatoes, and turnips. We need to figure out how to retrofit greenhouses rapidly. There is research into resilient foods, things like single-cell proteins, algae, or converting cellulose, wood, and leaves into sugar. It sounds unappetizing, but in a nuclear winter, sludge that keeps you alive is a gourmet meal. Governments need emergency protocols that assume the grid is gone and the sky is black. Right now, most disaster plans assume a localized hurricane, not a 10-year global winter. That needs to change. For you, the individual, prepping for nuclear winter is about deep resilience. A bunker is fine for the first month, but unless you have 10 years of food, you have to come out eventually. You need renewable food sources that don't need a lot of sun. Mushrooms are a good bet. Potatoes are legendary for a reason. You need a community. The lone wolf dies in the snow. You need skills. medical, mechanical, agricultural, and you need a location that isn't near a blast zone, but also isn't so remote that you freeze to death alone. The most important prep, honestly, is mental. It is the willingness to endure a world that is harder, colder, and darker than anything you have ever known. It is accepting that your standard of living is gone and finding a reason to keep going anyway. Survival is not about gear. It is about adaptability. To summarize, nuclear winter is not a singular event. It is a long emergency. It starts with fire, moves to darkness, settles into deep cold, and ends in a slow, painful starvation. It is the ultimate disruptor of human potential. The bombs break the cities, but the winter breaks the civilization. It takes a fast military catastrophe and stretches it into a decade-long struggle for biological survival. The timeline we walked through, days of chaos, months of cooling, years of famine, decades of rebuilding, is the realistic forecast based on our best atmospheric science. It is a grim picture, but looking at it squarely is the only way to understand the stakes. We are not just gambling with cities. We are gambling with the climate stability that allowed humanity to evolve in the first place. I hope this timeline gave you a clearer picture of what the day after really looks like. If you want to dive deeper into the specific mechanics of cold weather agriculture or EMP hardening, we have guides on that. But for now, I want you to leave some intel in the comments. If the sky turned black tomorrow, what is the one skill you bring to your community? Are you the medic, the mechanic, or the farmer? Let me know down below. And if you found this analysis useful, do the tactical thing, like subscribe and share this with someone who thinks a basement full of canned beans is enough. Until next time, stay safe, stay prepared, and keep your eyes on the horizon. Out.